Good morning. Welcome to today's daily devotional. Today is episode number 24 in our study of the book of Acts. We're going to be covering Acts chapter 12. We're going to look at verses 1 through 19. Now, if you remember from the previous devotional that you had, we talked about and looked at the church in Antioch. As the church was under persecution, the church scattered, and as the church scattered, the gospel spread everywhere that the people went. They took the gospel with them, and as a result, many people got saved. Now, Antioch became the central hub for the church and for really sending out missionaries into the world. Now, Acts chapter 12, we're going to see some more persecution taking place, more martyrdom that is taking place. Let's look at it together, starting in chapter 12, verses 1 through 19. It says, "Now about that time, Herod stretched out his hand to harass some of the church." Now, stop you right there. Herod, this was Herod Agrippa the First. This would have been the grandson of Herod the Great. Now, you'll remember the name of Herod the Great because he was the one who ruled in the days of Jesus's birth. He was the one that was causing babies to be killed because he was afraid of the Messiah being born. And Harold Agrippa the First, was also the nephew of Herod Antipas, who had a role in the trial of Jesus, and you can see that in Luke chapter 23. So this is the grandson of Herod the Great, and this king or this leader now at this time began to harass some of the church. And it says, here's how he really harassed them. He killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. Now, James would have been one of the 12 apostles. This is the first apostle that was martyred for the sake of Jesus. This is a new development in the history of the church. Up to that point, up through chapter 12, there had been a streak of success. They had experienced one conversion after another. First there was Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul. There was the Gentile conversion of Cornelius and all those with him. And God was doing an incredible work in all of that region. Gentiles and Jews alike in the place of Antioch, they were getting saved. But now in Acts chapter 12, it's almost like Satan said, I don't want this to happen. I can't let this happen. I have to beat down the saints. I have to trample down the church. And so he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. Now, James was one of the apostles. He was one of the 12. This is the first of the 12 to be killed. Now, people might think that the apostles had some kind of special protection because they were the apostles, but he did not have or give special protection to his disciples, to his apostles, when he ascended into heaven. They would go through the same amount of persecution, and Jesus warned them in Matthew chapter 10. He warned them to be ready for persecution. In fact, in Mark chapter 10, verse 35 through 40, John and his brother James came to Jesus and considered, they wanted to be considered his two chief lieutenants. Jesus replied to them and said, "You don't know what you ask. Can you drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" In other words, can you handle what I'm going to have to go through? That would be persecution, death, martyrdom, all of that. Can you handle that? Now, James and John didn't really know what they were saying, but they promised. And Jesus then to them promised in return. He said, "You will indeed drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism that I am baptized, you will be baptized." So the martyrdom was the fulfillment of a promise that God had given to them. Now, we often think that just because we come to Jesus, that persecution is going to go away, life will be easy, we'll be healthy, wealthy, and wise. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The truth is, when you accept Jesus, you are receiving the promise that there will be persecution, there will be trials, there will be hard times, there will be suffering. That's why Jesus said, "Count the cost." Be really sure that you're willing to follow me because it's not going to be easy like you think it is. All of the disciples, except for John, would die a martyr's death. And in fact, they tried to kill John and he just wouldn't die. All of them died a martyr's death. And so when you come to Jesus, just expect that this doesn't mean an easy road. This means a potentially difficult and hard road, a road filled with suffering and pain and persecution and trial. But the end result On the other side of that road, at the end of the journey that we are on in this present age, we are going to experience the blessings, the incredible blessing of being in the kingdom of God that others will not be able to be a part of. It's worth it. It is well worth the suffering. In fact, in Revelation, it talks about the saints not loving their lives even unto death. So it is worth it to make a decision to say, Jesus, I will follow you. Well, let's keep going. And because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to seize Peter also, arrest Peter. He saw that it pleased the Jews. When he had James executed, it pleased the Jews. It made Herod more popular. Popularity is what was really driving him. And so, in order to maintain popularity or increase his level of popularity, he went ahead and he seized Peter as well. And he arrested Peter, put Peter in prison. So it says it was during the days of unleavened bread. Now, that's part of the Passover celebration. You have Passover, unleavened bread, Feast of First Fruits, all rolled into one. It was the days leading up really to the Passover that was the days of unleavened bread. They were preparing everything to get it ready. Then Passover happened, then unleavened bread happened, then the Feast of First Fruits. So it was during that special time, that festival time, that feast time in the city of Jerusalem. And so he had him arrested. He put him in prison. And he delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers to keep him, intending to bring him before the people at Passover, which is exactly what happened with Jesus. He brought Jesus during the Feast of Passover. He brought them before the people, and the people had the choice: do you want Barabbas or do you want Jesus? And they chose Barabbas over Jesus. They said to Jesus, crucify him. So it's almost a repeat of the same scene that happened at that time. But he wanted to make sure that Peter was going to stay there in prison. Now, if you remember all the way back to Acts chapter 5, Peter miraculously escaped from prison, and it was God's divine intervention. So Herod wanted to make sure that that did not happen again, that there's no repeat of that same event. So he put him with a special high security detail to guard him. And it was 4 squads of soldiers. Now, in that 4 squads of soldiers, they would have been constantly rotating their positions, but it is thought and believed and even stated in some of the history that they would have actually had 4 guards with him at all times. Now, typically, you would be chained to 1 soldier. In a special precaution, you would have 2, but in this particular case, there was always 4 with him at all times, like he was some mass murderer or psychopath. And what they would have done was they would have had his wrists shackled, and then they would have had him chained to a guard on each side, and then there would have been 2 other guards that were constantly keeping watch outside of the cell. So you would have had Peter, 2 guards in the cell, 2 guards outside of the cell. Again, like he's some kind of a psychopath, some kind of a sociopath, somebody who is like I said, a mass murderer. This is a person preaching the gospel. This is how much they hated Jesus and how much they wanted to stop the message of God from going forward. They wanted to make sure that nothing that Jesus would say would be able to have an impact upon the world. So they took his disciples, they killed one, they imprisoned the other. It says that Peter was therefore kept in prison, but constant prayer was offered to God for him by the church. And I love that word. The word for constant prayer is the word aktinos, which is the same kind of word as the prayer of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. It was an agonizing prayer. They were consistently, constantly, earnestly, agonizingly praying for Peter. That term, aktinos, not just agonizing prayer, it's also a medical term, which means describing the stretching of a muscle to its limits. They were fervent. They were stretching their ability to pray as far as it could happen. They were in constant prayer. Why? Because they knew it was the same scenario that happened with the Lord. They knew that Peter had been arrested at the time of Passover, that Peter would be falsely accused, falsely tried, hung on a cross for in the same way that the Lord was. And so they were in constant prayer because they knew this event, they had seen this event, they understood this event. Well, God is going to miraculously intervene. Again, is it because of the prayers of the people that he intervened, or was that his plan of all time, or do the two things really work together? This is God's plan. The people cried out to him. It deepened their faith, and it will deepen their faith. But there was something special about prayer. Something special about lifting up the name of God, of going to Him, of approaching His throne of grace. The Bible talks about our prayers being like incense that rise up to the nostrils of God. He loves the prayer of the saints, and they were constantly praying for him. They were earnest in their praying for him. They were stretching themselves in the praying for Peter during this time. Was it an instantaneous deliverance? No, it took time, and it was the time that they were constantly in prayer. If he would have done it at the very beginning, if God had just made sure Peter was delivered at the very beginning, the people would not have had an opportunity to be stretched in prayer the way that God was going to stretch them. They needed to learn something as much as God was going to deliver Peter in a miraculous way. And they needed to see that and experience it. Here's what it says. And when Herod was about to bring him out that night, Peter was sleeping, bound with two chains between two soldiers, and guards before the door were keeping the prison. That's the four. Now behold, an angel of the Lord stood by him, and a light shone in the prison. And he struck Peter on the side, and he raised him up, saying, Arise quickly. And his chains fell off his hands. Then the angel said to him, Gird yourself and tie your sandals. So Peter did. And he said to him, the angel said to Peter, Put on your garments and follow me. I love that. I love those statements. First of all, I want you to note that Peter was sleeping. It's not like he was in high anxiety. Uh, we in that situation probably would have not slept a wink. We would have been in high anxiety, but Peter wasn't. He was able to sleep soundly on what seemed to be the last night of his life before execution. Remember, it says in Psalm 127:2, he gives his beloved sleep. What an encouraging thing that the peace of God surpasses all understanding, that the peace of God surpasses the situation that I am in. Let that be a reminder. The peace of God can surpass whatever situation you are in. Whether it is a trial, a test, a persecution, a time of suffering, a hardship in life, a painful event, the peace of God can surpass my situation. He was chained, and yet God gave him a special deliverance. The angel appeared and did something real. And I love these words. It says that not only did the light shine around him, the angel struck Peter, raised him up, said, Arise quickly, and the chains fell off. What an amazing term that is. The chains fell off. There may be things in your life that are holding you back, maybe in a metaphorical, figurative, or even spiritual sense. You are in prison. Maybe you're in bondage. Maybe you're in bondage to an addiction of some sort. Maybe you're in bondage to your own bitterness. Maybe you're in bondage to unforgiveness towards somebody else. Whatever that bondage is, whatever that thing that is imprisoning you, God can do the miraculous. Often it is released through prayer. God can do the miraculous where the chains just fall off, where you are set free, and God brings you out and delivers you from the situation that you are in. So he said, Gird yourself, tie on your sandals, put on your garment, and follow me. So Peter went out and he followed him. and he did not know what was done by the angel was real. He thought he was having a dream, thought it was another vision, but thought he was seeing a vision. When they were past the first and the second guard posts, they came to the iron gate that leads to the city, which opened to them of its own accord. It's like the gate just swung open. How cool would that be? Just to see the gate swing open on their own. And they went out, and they went down the street, and immediately the angel departed from him. When Peter had come to himself, meaning he came to his senses, he realized, wait a second, this is not a vision, this is really happening. When Peter came to himself, he said, now I know for certain that the Lord has sent his angel and has delivered me from the hand of Herod and from all the expectation of the Jewish people. What was their expectation? They were going to put him to death. That was the expectation. What was the expectation? Peter would stand before them. They would put somebody else next to Peter. Somebody else, they would say, which one do you want released? They would say, the other person. What do you want me to do with Peter? Crucify him. That was the expectation of the Jewish leaders and the Jewish people. God delivered him out of it. God set him free. God delivered him in a miraculous way that defies all explanation, that defies all logic. God has the ability to rescue us and deliver us from whatever situation we are in, whatever bondage that we face. God is able. So, what does it say? So when he had considered this, that when Peter thought about what just happened, this is crazy, this is miraculous. I don't have any explanation of this. God just miraculously delivered me from the bondage that I was in. He miraculously set me free. When he considered this, he came to the house of Mary. Now, Mary was the mother of John, whose surname was Mark. John Mark. He is the one who would have written the Gospel of Mark. He came to the house of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. Again, they were earnestly praying. They were fervent in their prayers. They were constantly praying. Peter knocked at the gate. A girl named Rhoda came to answer. When she recognized Peter's voice because of her gladness, she did not even open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter stood before the gate. She was so excited, she just ran inside and didn't even bother to let him in. I'm so excited. I've got to tell people. I've got to let people know. There's good things that are happening, and I have to let everybody else know. But they said to her, this is the disciples and all who are gathered for prayer, they said to her, you're crazy. Come on. Seriously? There's no way. It can't possibly be the case. You're beside yourself. Well, she kept insisting and saying, no, this is real. He's out there. He's at the gate. So they said, no, it's his angel. That's the only logical explanation. There has to be a logical explanation. It could not be Peter. Peter is in prison. Peter has 4 guards around him. There's no way that this is going to happen. I know we have been praying for this, but even in my prayer, I don't believe that it's really happening. How many of you can identify with that? I'm praying, but I don't really believe it's going to happen. They prayed. They didn't really believe that it could happen. She insisted, no, it's Peter. They said, no, it's an angel. Now Peter kept knocking, and when they opened the door, they saw him. They were astonished. They were blown away. But motioning to them with his hand to just be quiet, keep silent, he declared to them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, go tell these things to James and the brethren. Now, James is not the one that was just martyred. This James is the brother of Jesus who wrote the book of James. The book of James, the account of the book of James written by the brother of Jesus. He was the leader of the church in Jerusalem. Go tell him. Go tell him. And Peter departed and went to another place. Why would he go to another place? Because he wanted to make sure that the Romans couldn't find him, that the Jews couldn't find him, that they realized that it's, this is the first place they're going to go look. We have to get somewhere else. We have to hide out. It's okay to do that at that time. So here's how the story ends for today. Then, as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the Jews or among the soldiers about what had become of Peter. In other words, they were like, what's going on. There was no small stir. Everybody was like pointing fingers, blaming everybody else. Everybody was upset. Everybody was certain that their lives are going to be at stake here. But when Herod searched for Peter and did not find him, he examined the guards, he listened to the guards, he talked to the guards, and then he commanded that they should be put to death because it was their fault. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there. That was the ultimate conclusion. He was furious that his prized prisoner had just escaped and somebody had to pay the price. And so the execution of the guards would have been customary in that day. If a guard's prisoner escaped, the guard was given the penalty due to the prisoner, and in this case it was death. And so the guards received exactly what Peter was supposed to receive. God did something amazing. God responded to prayer. God delivered Peter out of the bondage that he was in. God miraculously caused the chains to fall off of Peter, and Peter was able to walk in freedom in the newness of life. In a figurative, spiritual way, that's exactly what happens to us. When we come to Jesus in faith, we are released and set free from the bondage of sin that we have always been in. Our chains fall off. We are miraculously set free, and we go forth from that point on following him. The disciples all gathered together and prayed. They did not believe it would happen. That's why they were so astonished when Peter was there. But they prayed fervently anyway. Prayer is an amazing thing. Prayer doesn't make God move, but prayer pleases God. Prayer touches God's heart. Prayer is what God wants. It's communication with him. He communicates to us through his word. We communicate to him through prayer. We need to have prayer in our lives to adequately be able to have relationship with him. And when we are in relationship with him, trusting him, he can do the miraculous. Well, hopefully you got something out of the message here today, and I hope that you'll join me back here tomorrow as we get into chapter 12, starting in verse 20. Well, have a great day. Join me back here then.